This is The 10, brought to you by Surrey County Cricket Club. My name's John Surtees. I'm sat here with Mark Church, with Yaz Rana from Wisden Cricket Podcast, with Surrey legend Kirstie White, and we'll be taking you from 10 to 6 in a list of the top 10 Surrey women's cricketers of the 21st century. So many candidates on this list. Really excited to be getting into it with the panel today. But before we get going, let me just remind you that the Surrey membership for the 2026 season is still available. KearOval.com/membership for all your details there. It's going to be an amazing season. Surrey members can get tickets for every day of Surrey cricket, be that in the County Championship, the men's and women's Vitality Blast, the men's and women's One Day Cup, the women's T20 County Cup is in there as well. You can still get tickets for the Women's World Cup in the Pavilion, the last England group game, 2 semi-finals coming up there as well. All sorts of other benefits, stand and vote for General Committee, discounts at the bar, discounts in the shop, all sorts of things going on there for Surrey membership. It really is an amazing product. I know I'm literally being paid to say that, but it is just one of the great value products I think you can get in London. KearOval.com/membership for all the information you need there. On with the 10. All right. So here we are for the 10, the top 10 Surrey women's players of the 21st century. Now, before we start going through our list, it's going to be the same as the men's. We're going to have 2 episodes. There's going to be 5 players on each. We're going to go 10 to 6 in this one. We're going to go 5 to 1 in the next episode. Kirstie, I wanted to talk to you about this. It's a wretchedly hard job putting together this list. I mean, it was a wretchedly hard job putting the men's list together, but their performances are inherently far more comparable because of the journey that women's cricket has been on over the last 25 years. We sit here now in the heart of a club that has a full-time professional women's setup for the first time in its history, and something we're incredibly proud of doing. But the journey that women's cricket has been on in the last 25 years has really been quite extreme, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things you've got to take into consideration when we start talking about some of the players over the last 25 years is 2025 was the first year that the whole of the women's county setup was professional. So, coming from that regional setup where the majority of teams had fully professional teams, there was some big disparity there. So, even coming into 2020, we didn't have fully professional teams. We had elements with KSL and obviously moving into the 100, but it's literally only in the last few years that the game has become fully professional. And with that, you have to then think about the number of games that players were playing in a season. So when we talk about some players from, way back in the early 2000s, their triumphs and their wickets and the runs that they've scored will be based over, playing sometimes only 10 games in a season in a county championship, where actually now you look at how many games teams are playing across the length of the season starting in April and ending in September, where the county championship way back when started, maybe June and ended end of July, if you were lucky. Yeah,
so you talk. There's a sort of 15-year period there where the women's game was fully amateur essentially, and you think just the not only the lack of cricket that they were playing, as you say, sometimes only 10 games a year. So in terms of like some of the terrifying numbers we were throwing around for the men's game, someone like Mark Ramprakash, who was playing in that era, the numbers we went through in the episode of the 25 where we talked about Ramps, they just didn't have the opportunity to put up some of those numbers. They didn't have the opportunity to train full time. They had coaches that were involved in that team, but again, the coaches were largely voluntary as well. So a lot of these players really never had the opportunity to find out how great they could have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about the men's game now and the professional game. Men play the majority of the year and then have a short block in the winter. For the women, it's the complete opposite. They train from mid-October all the way through till April, really, to then play 3 months of one weekend until recently of one weekend of cricket.
Whilst holding down a full-time job.
Or being in full-time education, or just living out of your parents' house still because you can't afford to move out anywhere. So it's a completely different landscape. Whereas now, actually, that's flipped in the last year. Actually, girls are now playing pretty much all year round, either then going over to Australia and playing throughout the winter, or having a very short break and then into training. And it's starting to align a little bit more with the men's game. Obviously not quite there with the longer format.
Well, I think we can all agree that that is a hugely positive development for the game, and I think I can speak for everyone at Surrey when we speak of the pride that we have for that full time women's setup now, and it's something we've been proud of women's cricket at Surrey for a very long time, but now to have that women's dressing room sitting there alongside the men's dressing room, and at the moment the trophy that is in pride of place in the club trophy cabinet is the 2025 Vitality Blast Trophy, because that was the trophy that was won by the club this year, and there it is sitting there. So yeah, I think it's just important to contextualise the conversations we're about to have, with that. So Kirstie, you've experienced a lot of that yourself. You've played through a lot of different areas yourself, which I'm sure we'll come to. So thank you for that. So moving now on to the list. At number 10, we have. We talked in the men's 25 during the 25 about a number of players, Mark Butcher, Ian Ward, particularly, who are now very, very well known as voices in the game, but previously had fantastic playing careers behind them. Number 10 on the women's list, another player of the same sort of ilk. It's and many people would not necessarily have known that she played for Surrey. So yeah, number 10 on the list, Mel Jones.
Yeah, no, Mel. She was hugely pivotal in terms of Surrey in the early 2000s. It must have been around 2003, 2004 county championships, where she obviously acted as Surrey's overseas and completely dominated county cricket.
And worked for the club as well, I think.
Yeah, worked for the club, coached for the club. And then, I think she just scored back-to-back hundreds, game after game after game. And it was in an era where the county championship was it was a one-day format, but it was played over 5 consecutive days. So, if you were in a full-time job, you'd take a week off of work, you'd go up to Cambridge and you'd play 50 overs, 5 days on the bounce.
Word.
Out of Cambridge in the summer. And Surrey were always at the top of Div 1, and it was usually between Surrey and Lancashire or Surrey and Sussex over who would win that championship. But Mel Jones, the number of runs that she would accumulate over that period were huge.
One of the things that someone said to me when I was doing a bit of research for this podcast was there's a phrase that's used a lot at ACE. I don't want to break any surprises, but I suspect at some point we're going to start talking about Ebony Rainford Brent, and it's a phrase that she uses at ACE, which is you can't be what you can't see. And in the context of ACE, that means providing black role models to young black kids who want to play cricket, and showing that there are players out there that they can see, and therefore they can be that. One of the things people talked about Mel Jones using that phrase, you can't see what you can't be, was that they were very, very keen to bring over a world-class overseas at that time to show the women's setup at that time what best looked like. What the level of preparation that she demanded, the level what she demanded from her colleagues. Do you think that's a sort of fair bit of praise to throw Mel's way, and maybe sort of again a sort of tipping point at that time?
Yeah, 100%. And also, what you've got to remember is the landscape of the women's game at that time was at the very bottom of the pecking order as well. So. Being such an elitist sport at that time, it didn't make sense that such a diverse central London-based club wasn't reflected in the players and the players coming through, and even at grassroots cricket. So I think that's huge kudos to the fact that things do have to change, and we have to have role models that the players can see and actually think, that can be me. Why couldn't it be me?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just before we number 9, Yaz, Churchy, you're both excellent cricket broadcast yourself, but Mel Jones, one of the best.
I think sometimes from the outside you might look at the people who are on the ICC or Sky A-list rota and think, any ex-pro who fancies a gig in the cricket media world can do it. No, it's really competitive, and there's a reason why Mel Jones gets the gigs that she does. We were lucky enough to have her on the Wisden podcast earlier this year. She's an amazing reader of the game, incredibly articulate, but also, probably more so than most people within cricket, really gets a sense of the perspective of cricket in what the wider world, and actually there are more important things than cricket. She was pivotal in the far more important than anything we've been talking about today story of evacuating the Afghanistan women's team from Afghanistan a few years ago. And yeah, go and seek out what Mel said herself about that story. But it's phenomenal. She's a more than just an amazing cricket personality. She's an amazing human.
Yeah, she's not the only person on this list that's going to be described as a force of nature. I don't think. Okay, number 9. So we're gonna do 8 and 9 together. We did this on the 25 as well. There are certain players I think that come as pairs. We talked about Tom Curran and Jade Dernbach. We talked about Ricky Clark and Jordan Clark in terms of similarities. Number 9 on our list is Sarah Clark. Number 8 on our list is Caroline Bars. So again, names that may not be familiar to every Surrey fan. Kirstie, we were talking about players that played in that early part of the century, but we talked in the 25 about Sakalo Mushtaq and Ian Salisbury spinning the ball different ways at either end. Clark and Bars very much of the same tradition.
Yeah, and in the same team again, like we've just alluded to with the men's 25. These two players, their stats, you look at them now and you think, well, that's not really that great. But in the context of the game and when it was, they were taking wickets week in, week out, and the number of 5-wicket hauls they had between them, they would win games on their own. You get through those power play overs and you'd have your two spinners on, and by the time you blinked that you'd got through, thought you're into the back end of the overs, and they'd kind of churned up 20 overs between them and taken 6, 7, 8 wickets, and all you needed from the death was your death bowlers just to clear up, really. So yeah,
and we've spoken about the difficulty of statistically comparing these eras, and Caroline and Sarah would have played entirely 50-over cricket, and then you look at a Kia Super League team would have played entirely T20 cricket, and the South East Stars, a lot of their statistics don't necessarily get recorded alongside other Surrey statistics because it was South East Stars and it was a regional team with Kent, and it was slightly different in that way. But on the list of the most 50-over wickets for Surrey women, Caroline Bars 124, Sarah Clark 120. Next on the list is Patsy Lovell and Cecily Scott with 64 each. It's basically double.
Yeah, and I think what you've got to remember with these two players as well is that this was of an era and of a time where we didn't have spin coaches. We trained probably once a week if you were lucky, and played club cricket the majority of your weekends, where you'd be lucky to turn out 11, or you'd be lucky if the pitch had been marked. So these are probably self-coached players who spent hours and hours just bowling on their own in a net, just to master their skills. Sarah Clark bowling leg spin, it's not an easy skill to master on your own when you haven't got a coach guiding you. And of course, very lucky during that Surrey era that there were a lot of coaches available, and actually were far further ahead in terms of what facilities and resource was available to players. But still, 6 nights out of the week, you're coming home from work, or you're travelling to and from work, and maybe a club game, and you've got one evening, maybe a Thursday night, out of Guildford to bowl a few overs, try and master leg spin in a lane with no coconut mat or anything down. So yeah, you have to really take your hat off to these players for actually being able to master their craft the way that they have.
They are remarkable numbers as well. And the other thing, and Kirstie made a brilliant point earlier about, there was you couldn't sit down on a laptop and have a watch and watch other leg spinners and other people doing their stuff, because it just wasn't available then. And the real shame is, as you said it there, that those are two names that a lot of people outside of Surrey won't have heard of. But there just wasn't the amount of cricket and the coverage and all of that we have now. So yeah, those numbers are remarkable numbers when you think of, as Kirstie said, the amount of cricket that was played and what you were having to do around playing cricket.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on from Sarah and Caroline to absolute pioneers, and really pleased. Thanks Kirstie for trying to explain a little bit of what their experience in those times would have been, because I think that would be very, very eye opening to a lot of people now who see the women's game where it is that there were players of who that was their experience as recently as 20 years ago is I think something that maybe a lot of people wouldn't necessarily realise. We're now at number 7 on our list, and this is a player who was a different end of the spectrum, really, from Sarah and Caroline, but also a player that has seen through a number of different eras while still being very young, and interestingly, controversially, a player who is still playing today, but not for Surrey. So she's now a full-time professional. She plays down on the south coast at Hampshire. Rana Southby. Kirstie, you were a teammate of hers for a very long time, so I think you've definitely earned the right to go first on this one. I remember Rana as a 13-year-old, being taken into your environment, around London Cup games and that sort of thing. So clearly, she was seen from the start as someone with a huge amount of potential.
Yeah, and she's one of these players that's come through the Surrey ranks and absolutely loves the game. She's was a proper Surrey badger. She'd turn up as a 11, 12-year-old and come and watch games, and she'd be asking players to sign her gloves, not realising that the next season she'd actually just be playing with these players. That's how into the game that she was. And I think she's a classic Surrey keeper that has come through. Coached by Jeremy Greaves, and was and still is probably one of the best wicket keepers in the county. In the country, and started off at Surrey, and during that era at South East Stars, where the women's game was starting to progress a little bit more and her batting wasn't quite where it was, and she lost the gloves to Kira Chatley and decided actually that it was probably better for her to move on and move down to Hampshire, where she's thriving now. But came through the Surrey ranks and really had to fight for her place. Never really, because of the number of batters that were in the team, didn't really have too much to do in terms of batting as she was in her younger years, but in the last few years has actually really showed up with the bat.
And is there or thereabouts now in she's in again, you talk about developments in the women's game, she's in that England shadow squad now, the England A, essentially, the women's Lions. So really sort of again stepping up to another level now and sort of trying to make that breakthrough into the international game. But you actually, we've already mentioned the player who's at number 6, the last player on this episode of the 10. It's the player that got the gloves, as you said, and is now making a huge impact on the professional Surrey's team. Kira Chatley, number 6 on the list. Yes, Kira Chatley. What is again a fine example of someone who's really now having an opportunity to make a full-time professional career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a question for Kirstie in a second, actually. But I think one of the interesting things watching Kira Chatley this season was in a batting lineup full of players in and around the international setup. Quite often be watching them, and Chatley would not look out of place, and at times would be one of the better performing players. We saw that all throughout the summer, including in the 100. And actually, if you look at English players outside the current England setup to do well in the 100, Chatley is right up at the top of the list of players in that category. And a question for you actually about both Chatley and Southby, two keepers. Amy Jones has been the England keeper for a very long time now. Both Chatley and Southby are quite a lot younger than Jones. They're two of the players who are talked about as future England keepers. Do you see one or both ending up playing for England?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting debate, isn't it? Because I think Kira's had to work really, really hard on her keeping over the last few years, and it's come on so much. Rihanna with the gloves is definitely the better keeper, and is similar in Ben Folkes in that entity. I think it would be a really interesting decision that comes from Charlotte Edwards' camp around who will become the next England wicketkeeper batter, because you could easily take Rihanna Southby or you could take Kira Chatley, because Kira Chatley is so explosive and she can do a job, but actually is really super reliable with the gloves now. So I definitely wouldn't want to be in that camp trying to make those decisions.
Yeah, I think it just shows again the strength. We talked a lot in the 25 about the amount of players that we use cliches like Surrey through and through, but players who've come through the system. Talked about players like Ollie Pope and Jason Roy who've come through the system, and people within the club have been excited about the potential of when they were making that first class debut and whatever. And you look at again like Keir and Rihanna, just that conversation you guys were having just there again is a testament. You mentioned Jeremy Greaves earlier as someone who worked with Rihanna. It's a testament to that Surrey system and the ability of this club to produce international players both in the men's and women's game, Sergi.
Well, I think what I would say with Kira is that you're seeing how hard she's worked on her game with the bat, especially in the fact now that she's launching balls out the ground, and that was never part of her game at all, was it? And Yaz, made the point in that batting lineup. She stood out. She makes her runs, and goes at it from ball one. And with the gloves, I think now she is a very good keeper, isn't she? A very, very good keeper, explosive batter, and two extremely talented cricketers that we've just been talking about.
Yeah. So Kira first played for the under 11s thing in 2011. Rana started playing in 2012. So again, in the context of this podcast, players who have been around the club for a large part of this century, and playing a really, really big part in that women's setup. So there we are. That's your first half of the 10. Mel Jones at 10, Sarah Clark at 9, Caroline Barrs at 8, Kira Chatley at 7. Rihanna Southby at 7, Kira Chatley at number 6. One more episode of the 10 to come. We'll be taking you from 5 till 1. I'm John Surtees. I'm sat with Mark Church, with Yaz Rana, with Kirstie White. Do come back for the second episode of the 10 coming up soon. This was the 10.